Welcome back. This is Gmax 1.2 for the beginning modeler, video number 30. The topic of this video is preparing your project to export to Flight Sim. And why do we do this? Well, periodically you need to do the export to identify and get resolved any issues you have created to date. And that just keeps things going smoothly for you. The last thing you need is to get to the end of the project, try to export for the first time, and be deluged with just tens of problems, 40, 50, 60, and as a result of those problems, you might find you have to reanimate some parts, you may have to rebuild some parts. It's just a source of frustration. So if you manage these on an ongoing basis, you'll know that the work you've done will likely not have to be redone, especially when it comes to mapping and animating parts. So let's talk about how we get the aircraft ready for export. The first thing, let's go right to the beginning of the Gmax universe here and where we place our aircraft. It is typical. Alright, let's talk about the way I do it, and let's talk about exporting to FS9 or FS8. And the reason for that is FSX is a little different, and there's other things that have to be done. So when preparing for FS8 or FS9 exports, we're going to, and for anything in general, in this particular case of positioning the aircraft, you can position the aircraft anywhere, frankly, but to keep it simple and obvious that the aircraft is where you need it to be, there are some general rules of how it should be replaced in your design program. So the center of the universe has a meaning to your model, and it has a meaning to Flight Sim. If you look in the Flight Sim aircraft config, there is a reference datum position I'm showing here at X, Y, and Z coordinates of 0, 0, 0. That equates to the Gmax center of the universe world where these crosshairs intersect. And when we're placing our aircraft, we want it to be here just to minimize any confusion. Lord knows there's enough of it when you try to get these things into Flight Sim and get a flight model set up for it. So the first thing when we're placing the project longitudinally along this line is I always place it at 25% of the mean aerodynamic chord, which is 25% back from the leading edge of the root chord. This one looks a little deep to me. It's probably at 30-33%, but generally that's where you need to have it. It just simplifies things visually, and you get used to looking at numbers. You know that your center of gravity and the center of the aircraft is right on the wings the way they should be. And then when on the side views, go to the right view, when you extend your gear on an aircraft with a nose gear, you'll know that your main gear needs to be behind the center of gravity, and your nose gear in forward of the center of gravity. And if you do it this way, you know that this Gmax center of the universe and the center of gravity being in the same place, your aircraft's going to come in balanced on all of its wheels. It's not going to fall backwards and go crazy on you. So yeah, that's one way of looking at it, I guess. The second thing is from the side view, you can see how I place this relative to the Gmax center of the universe. I always place it at or near the thrust line, which is usually at or near the waterline of an aircraft. In my case, I usually place the aircraft 1 to 2 inches above the thrust line, which goes directly through the center of the spinner. And if you have a multi-engine aircraft, it's kind of the average of all your prop spinners. So this is the way I always place it, just slightly above this longitudinal line here. Okay, and then from the front view, you can see that I have the aircraft on center line. It goes directly up through the center of the aircraft all the way through, and that means it's not skewed off to the left or right. So that's the way it needs to be placed, should be placed for simplicity reasons of just managing things in general. And ultimately, when you go to get measurements to plug in figures into your aircraft config for lights or gear or engine location or fuel tanks, what have you, you can get that reading directly off of out of Gmax by clicking on the object like the spinner, and it will give you the precise location of where these are in meters. Of course, that has to be converted to feet, and that's why I recommend getting this little convert tool that I gave you a link to in an earlier video. Okay, that takes care of that part, positioning of the aircraft in the Gmax universe. Secondly, as you build your aircraft, you want to do a couple things. Number one, always use meaningful names. Don't leave boxes and cylinders named boxes and cylinders, because once you get up to 500 or 800 parts, you have no clue what those things are until you click on them and go look at them, and it just doesn't make sense. So give all your parts meaningful names, number one. And of course, for animated parts, you have to do that, or otherwise they won't get animated. So they have to use the reserved names for those animation tags. Secondly, order your structure: fuselage at the high level, wings linked to your fuselage, flaps linked to your wings, ailerons to your wings, and so forth. And that gives you a good way of managing all those parts that you're going to build up here. We don't have many parts here, really. I mean, it may look like a lot to a beginner here, but once you get up to 500, 800, 1200 parts, believe me, being able to select the wing and all of its subparts by clicking on one thing is important to you. Given wings a name that says wing underscore left or right is helpful. Or you can select the wing and then go find it. I mean, I suppose you could do that, and that may help a little. And then select the subtree. But if you want to manage these parts quickly and easy and be productive and not spend a lot of time trying to figure out what I need to hide or what name I need to click on to hide and unhide and what have you, manage those part names well and establish this hierarchy and maintain it throughout. And I know in FSX that's only important for animated objects. Well, you get up to 800, 1200 parts, to me it's important for everything. It's just a matter of managing your inventory of parts here and being able to hide them or unhide them quickly and not waste a lot of time looking for parts. So just a word to the wise there. Now, this is the exterior model, and I have an exterior node, and we talked about that in an earlier video. But before we export this, I'm going to create an interior model, which is your BC model, and I'll show you how to do that. It's simple. So that's that part. Now, when you have other parts in the scene, let's go up here and unhide all, like the calibration box or any other helper tools you might have going. Obviously, you don't want to export those because they're going to show up in Gmax as gray boxes and just be in your way. Not in Gmax, but in Flight Sim as gray boxes and be in your way. So as long as you have these kinds of things in the scene, you have to export a certain way. That's to use the export selected, which is file. Usually when you have both in exterior and internal model, exterior and interior models, you'll just use the export. But as long as you have other things that don't belong in the sim, you'll have to use the export selected here. So you'll select everything you want to export, and it can be any part. It can be just a wing and its parts, or just a fuselage and its parts. It doesn't have to be an whole project. Export selected and check it out. So you can do that very quickly. It only takes a few seconds. Whereas you go for the full project, and it may take a minute to export it. So just some quick tips there. Okay, so we have a project and we want to test it out in the sim. How do we go about doing it? Well, in this case, because I have other parts I don't want to export, all I have to do is select all, or I can do the select subtree and select exterior, and I can go right up and do export selected. I've got it going directly to the aircraft folder of FS9, and of course I've got to have a folder here to export to. Well, if you don't have that yet, how do you go about creating it? Well, let's just talk about that for a minute. Let me pull up the flight sim folder here. And where do we start? How do I get something to export to? You can't export a model until you have a model folder to export to. So that model folder can frankly be anywhere. It can be on your desktop if you'd like. But if you're exporting it, I assume you want to go to the sim to check things out. So why not just go ahead and set it up in the sim? Now you'll see I have a folder here called XP54 video. Well, fortunately I already created this project as kind of a test to see if it would be an appropriate candidate for this series of video tutorials. So I essentially copied most of that out of there and created a new folder. And notice I have these underscores here. They mean nothing other than it sorts the projects that I'm working on up to the top of the list, and I don't have to go down to the list to search for them. So these are all projects I'm working on. So where do I get that from? We'll go to any aircraft, preferably an aircraft similar, like if you've got a single engine aircraft, go find a single engine aircraft. If you have an aircraft with retractable gear, find an aircraft with retractable gear, that kind of thing. Just find something that's a relatively close match, and that's all you need to do. So what I did was I was fortunate enough I had one that's in this case almost exact, so I just copied the model folder, the panel folder, sound folder, the texture folder, and the aircraft config, and the air file. I've got all these copies in here from working on the flight model, and I copy those over to my XP54 video tutorial project. So okay, I've got them in there, but I don't want to get these confused, or I don't want the sim to get confused with my other projects. So what do? I give a name to each of these folders. Model dot XP54V for video, panel dot XP54V for video. The sounds I just copied straight over. It's not a problem. It's usually the model that will get the sim confused. And the textures I just copied over from the other folder, simply because some of the textures, like the tires and the glass, and I think it's in the props, are already in that folder, so I didn't have to go through that process just yet when we weren't ready to talk about it. So, but when you start naming these folders, which is a good idea for you to do. When you go to flight sim or go to your aircraft config, these are the 4 things you need to change in the flight sim section. Give it a title, and it needs to be a unique one, so you can call it anything, test or whatever, as long as it's unique. And change these 4 names. Model equals. These all can be blank if you have no differentiating names after these folder names, but name it relative to your project. So model XP54B is what I have here. Panel XP54B is what I have here. Sound, I don't have a name, so I leave that blank. Texture, same. XP54B. So name your folders. Make sure that the aircraft config is pointing to them, otherwise it won't load. Alright, so now I have a model folder, and let me just delete out this. This is a result of exports, so I don't want to confuse you with that. The model folder contains two items: the model configuration file, which names what this model file is that the sim is to be looking for when it loads your model. So when you pull this in, you'll need to rename the model file to whatever you want it to be for your project, and then go into the model config file and change normal equals to be that model file name. Okay, the sim goes here first in the model folder and says, because you can have multiple models in here, but this has to point to the one that you want it to find. So once you do that, the sim goes into this folder and looks for this, and there it is. You're good to go. Okay. In terms of the panel folder you can either copy from another aircraft or you can alias. Just use a panel config and alias. That way you're not eating up file space just by duplicating something you already have. You can use this alias equals and just point to the aircraft folder /panel, and that will, when the flight sim loads, go to that aircraft and use that panel. So that's how that works. The alias works. Sounds like I said, you can copy over. There's another thing you can do for panels. If you don't have something in the sim that maybe you're satisfied with, in FS 2004 they had a folder called FS Convert, I guess is what that stands for. If you look in there, there's a lot of panels, default panels for heavy jets with 1 engine, 2 engine, 3 engines, and 4. Light jets for 1, 2, 3, and 4 engines. Reciprocating engines, standard either radials or gasoline engines, with fixed gear, 1, 2, 3, and 4 engines, and with retractable gear, 1, 2, 3, and 4 engines. So you can just copy this into your aircraft folder if you'd like. And there's lots of freeware sounds out on the network. So if you have a favorite flight sim site you'd like to download from, you can go get panels from there, you can go get sounds from there. So whatever you want to do, your choice. Okay, and that's really, did I mention the sim? Sim equals is your air file, your flight dynamics file, in conjunction with your config file. So sim equals has to be the name of this air file, and then these model panel sound texture names have to agree with the folder names. Okay, once you have that, you're good to go to export and to test in Flight Sim. So now that we know all of that, next thing to talk about is selecting this, all of what we're showing here. We're going to export it all. So we're going to go up to File and Export Selected. Remember, the reason I'm doing that is because I have some boxes that are hidden, or some parts that are hidden that I don't want to export. So if you use the export, it's going to export everything in the scene, not just what is being viewed in the viewports here. So you have to use Export Selected. When you do that, it pulls up, where do you want to export to? Well, in our case, we want to export to this folder we set up. So we point to that, we open the model folder, and we have to come down to say, save as type what? No, not a cloud, whatever. Not this, not scenery. We want to export to an aircraft object, the model file. So we place that in there. This then shows up that we were talking about a while ago in the model folder. So you can select that and say save to that. In other words, I want to overwrite that existing model file. And it says it already exists. Do you want to replace it? Well, duh, yeah. So we do. And in my export and most people's exports for FS9, we run middleman and model commander. And this is a nice GUI interface to all the options of make model, make MDL. And you can pull those options up here. These are all the options that are in the typical BAT file, the old DOS BAT file, but it gives you a nice GUI interface. And if you don't have these settings and you have this installed, then you need to either come back to this video and reference it, or do a print screen or capture screen of some sort and capture these settings, and you'll be good to go. Now usually when I'm in here, I do a fix specular and compile X file, and I give it a go, and then off it goes. It's now, see how fast that was? I couldn't even talk about it. So anyhow, that file is now exported. So that's how quick it can go, at least on a smaller project like this where I don't have a lot of parts. Now, if we wanted to create a VC interior model, how do we do that? Well, before we even think about it, we have to get rid of these other things in the scene. And you don't have to save this if you just run a test. So let's select the box and select invert here. And we'll need to do that the other way. Invert that selection. So I gets the box up here. This was a planer with a 3 view on it. We're going to delete that. And I need to unhide, or unfreeze rather. Unfreeze all. So I can select this box and delete it. Now everything I have in the sim, I can actually export. So what we need to do now is, number one, you got to have this high order node as exterior. So I usually make it a habit of selecting that and select subtree, just so I can verify I've got everything linked to that high order node, because if you don't, the export will not run correctly. It will not complete. So I select that once I've verified that, and now what I'm going to do is clone this entire object or entire project. And when you select in subtree mode, it asks you if you want to change the name of exterior 01 to something else. Well, we do. We want to call it interior. That becomes your VC model. And now I have two models, an interior model, which is selected, and an exterior model, which is not selected. Now generally we'll hide unselected, which is the exterior model, and I have the interior model showing. Now usually we'll have a pilot in here, which we would want to delete out of the VC, because we don't want him sitting there as we are flying the plane. So sometimes there's some things you need to do on the interior model, and there may be, if it's a very heavy model, things that you can delete. You can delete anything you can't see. May not be necessary if it's not a very heavy project, but heavy in terms of polys. But if you can't see it from the virtual cockpit, then there's really no need to export it. But for this purpose, most of these things we can see from the cockpit. We can't see the bottom side of the wings and the outside of the booms and that kind of thing, but we're not going to mess with that. Anyhow, we have everything ready to export. So we'll just hide unselected there, and we'll do the export. Notice the export selected is not highlighted because there's nothing selected in the scene. So we're going to export both the exterior and the interior models together here now. And we'll end up with an aircraft with a VC model. And we're going to select this again. I'll just double click it. And we're going to change this fixed specular option. and it did not like that because I think I selected, or didn't select, yeah, see, I senior object. I don't know how that got changed, but aircraft object is what we want, so here we go again. Let's see if this will work. Yes, do these options again, fix specular, and compile, and go. And here we go. It's exporting this model, both models, and it's done. So if we were to open Flight Sim now, you would see that in Flight Sim with no problem. And here's a picture I took earlier, as last time I tested it. This is the full model, and close that. Now we could open Flight Sim here, I suppose. I'm not sure how long that would take with this video running, but we could try it. How long are we here? We're 25 minutes in, so we have some time. Here she comes. I'll try to size the window down to, let's see, I think I have a XP54, video flight. There it is. As soon as this comes up, I'll size the window down so you can see all of it. I hadn't planned on opening the sim here for you, but alright, let me just change the view to something smaller here. Let me fit it into the, oops, downsize it a little first. Alright, we're getting there, folks. There you go. So there's the bad boy in Flight Sim, and you can see it's looking pretty darn good. Now, I said we created a VC. Let's just go see what the VC looks like. This is the panel I'm aliasing to in the XP72. Okay, this needs to be adjusted a bit, but you can see that we are in the sim, and we can back up here a little bit for a little better view. You can see some issues around here, but where do you say? Well, like right here, there's a vertice that's pulled in. We're just a climbing here. Let's kind of level out. Bring it down a little bit. Flatten out our attitude. Alright, so now we can look around here and see what kind of aircraft we get to look at when we, of course we can go out, we can sneak out if nobody's watching. Get outside the cockpit here so we can look back. Yeah, there's our exhaust ports back here. There's the back of the seat if we had one. So you can hit the space bar and get back to where we started here. I haven't set the views yet, so anyhow, that's your project in Flight Sim with the virtual cockpit, and we'll be showing you later on how to create virtual cockpit panel and gauges and flight controls and all the other stuff. So yeehaw, there we are. We can have some fun with it. You can test all your control surfaces. That's really what you're here to do, not to fly around the sim, but you know, sometimes you can't help yourself. Kind of zoom in here and you can see how nicely the control surfaces stand out, that they are not a solid piece across here. And if we weren't going so fast, we could probably deploy some flaps here. And I've got them set up to deploy kind of slow, but you can see them coming down. So the flap, the pivots we set on the flaps are Okay, that was funny. I was in Flight Sim and I was trying to show you something with the flaps, and I hit the flap key to deploy, and it's actually the same key as pausing the video. So I thought I'd crashed it there for a minute and lost everything, but took my time in responding to the issue and figured out I'd only paused the video. So I was able to get things back up and going and continue the video. So now we know how to get your aircraft prepared for export, and the steps it takes to get a virtual cockpit as well model created and into the sim. And we got to the sim and we were starting to check out our pivots and so forth, but that's probably a little heavy. I'm not even sure what it's done to the video because the flight sim is such a heavy application on the computer. But anyhow, we've gone through the basic steps of preparing the project for export, preparing your flight sim folders to receive the exported aircraft, and we did the export as well as the BC model, interior model export. So those are the basic steps necessary to do it. And if you start early with these exports, say after as you're doing the fuselage or your first component, once you get some components together, just start exporting and get that process set up and get those errors corrected long before they build up and cause unintended consequences for you. So I hope this has been somewhat helpful to you, and if you have any comments or suggestions, post them below. And gosh, I hope this whole series is helping you get off the get off the couch and over in front of the PC and start developing some aircraft, because old farts like me, are going to have to give it up soon. So we need people to fall in and step in and create some aircraft that, with a different perspective, and you who have different interests and types of aircraft and some of us who are out there building now. So gosh, just go have fun and be creative. That's what it's all about. So thanks for listening, and I'll check you next video.